What's up, everyone? Doug Polk here, and I want to talk today about something that happened on 2 Plus 2 that has kind of caused a little bit of a stir. It was originally in the Alex Dreyfus thread and got going a little bit into its own thread, now titled WCG writer Ben 86 Dispute. And I want to talk about my relationship with Ben, both from a personal and from a business standpoint. But before I do that, I want to take a step back and talk about why I think this is needed, and I want to talk about why I'm deciding to do this. So, a few years ago, I met Ben, and I really was hoping to have a good friendship with him. We were both high stakes players. We both lived at Shangri-La. Seemed like a nice dude, and I was really excited for that. It was someone that's kind of like, how you want to have coworkers? Well, when you play high stakes poker, there really aren't many people like that. And so when you do find someone that fits that bill, you're hopeful that you can really develop those relationships. But the problem is things went south fast on both a business and a personal level. And I guess I just want to say that I just don't want people to think that like everything that happens in my personal life is just going to get blasted on the internet because I'm on YouTube and I'm talking about people. And if we think about these things that happened before, if we think about all the prior stuff, like let's think about poker news, think about, all the different segments that we've done. While some of it has been like, juicier drama within the community, in fact, really when you do a news show, that's what it's all going to be about. At the same time, I only use public information. I might have given my take on things, but I wasn't actually throwing people under the bus with private information. And I think that's a really key line there to set between, what you're willing to say and not willing to say on the internet. Because if it just turns into whatever you have going on in your life is just going to show up on 2 Plus 2, show up on YouTube, show up on whatever, well, then it's really hard to have credibility and it's really hard to develop relationships. So I guess I just want to say that this is not something that I really hope that I ever have to do. And I seriously debated making this video for a couple of years now. I always ultimately decided that I didn't want to turn it into just me against Ben. And I feel like he's one of the good guys in the community. And I didn't want to hurt my image by, calling someone out that's, very endeared by the community. But honestly, at the same time, he scammed me. Like what he did in terms of the deal that he said he would do and then he didn't follow through on was a lie. And so I always felt like kind of torn between, if this was someone else, if this was like a random person, of course I would talk about it publicly. Of course I would say this. I mean, I've outed people a bunch of times, and of course it's much more direct than equity, like the Brad Booth thing or the Joshua Tyler thing. But at the same time, this still does steal from me in what happened. And like we're going to talk about the things from a business standpoint and a personal standpoint separately, because I think it's important that those are addressed as separate issues. And additionally, if there was not a business side to this, then I wouldn't even be telling this personal story. But what happened 2.5 years ago in Vancouver is the most absurd thing I've ever had happen to me in my life, in terms of just the way they treated me was absolutely unreal. And it wasn't just me and him. It was me, him, Jakun, Donger Kim, and Jason Les. And so there were people here that saw this, and this is not just some made-up story. This is something that actually happened. But we're going to get into that a little bit later. First, I want to talk about my business dealings with Ben and our background as far as how I met him and what we did together. So I want to open up with talking about our business relationship and where I feel that I was very much slighted. So I met Ben in early, I want to say 2013. It was during the Malaysia games. And for those of you that aren't familiar with that, on Full Tilt, there was 400, 800 with ante running every day, I think over the course of a few weeks or a month maybe. And the player getting the game going was a player named Malaysia, which was an Asian fish who ended up losing, I don't know, if at least a few million. Not totally sure what the end figures ended up being. And I jumped into those games as well. At the time, I had actually been playing a lot of Six Max. This is kind of towards, I guess, the end of when I was really trying to pursue Six Max as something I was doing, at a professional level. And this was the big game, right? And it's interesting because that game is so big. I think the max buy-in was 200K. Min buy-in was, I believe, 120K. I think you had to buy in for 150 big blinds. And, comparatively, if you looked at what ran right below that, the biggest was 2550. So definitely a pretty serious business game. Anyway, I played for at least a weekend, and I think I lost about $1 million. And so I was looking for people that could invest in me to take a piece so that I could free up some more capital, right? And Ben86 was one of those people. Ultimately, he agreed to take some percentage in exchange for sending me some amount of money. I can't remember the specifics. We're talking about 3.5 years ago at this point. This is a very long time ago. But he sent me the money. He had a piece. I actually think I ended up winning like some chunk of it back. Sent him some money back, and he made money. And actually, on that trip, this is the first time I'd actually met Ben. We met up, and we went to Joe Forte's in Vancouver. We talked about poker, talked about working out some kind of partnership, talked about having a deal. And just talking about poker, and really it was kind of refreshing because, it was good to have that kind of someone to like bounce ideas off of, and then have something that you're kind of working towards maybe down the road, right? Some kind of future partnership. But anyway, I just want to keep this as business related as I can. I left Vancouver after that, and I came back to Vancouver several months later in the fall, looking to play online, trying to play more heads up. I was about to play the Sauce Challenge against Ben Solsky. And over that course of time, when I got back, I met up with Ben several times. And we ultimately agreed that, I was coming up on the heads up world as being one of the best players, maybe the best. And he was one of the best PLO players. And so we had a very natural alliance there in that I could help him with PLO, and he could help me with No Limit. Sorry, let's take that over again. I could help him with No Limit, and he could help me with PLO. So I was extremely excited about this because I knew that in the No Limit landscape, things were kind of coming to a close for me. And if I look back at my heads up No Limit career, somewhere around that challenge with with Sauce, we got to make sure we don't confuse our Bens here, but somewhere around that challenge with Sauce, that there wasn't many people left to play. I'd played Ixom, I'd played really everyone else that there was left to play, and I knew that was kind of coming to an end. So I was naturally looking for my next step, right? And my next step seemed, at least on the surface, to be PLO because it was the most similar with the way it functioned. There was a lot of heads up PLO action. I could use parts of my No Limit training over in PLO and vice versa. So this seemed awesome. Same building. Let's make a deal, right? And we hung out a couple times out of the gate, and then we made a deal that I would exchange 25%. Sorry, let me tell the deal is I would exchange my No Limit coaching for his PLO coaching. And we would trade deals, and we would both have pieces of each other in, I want to say we actually had pieces in both games, but I could be wrong. But the bottom line is we were going to have pieces in both games. And I was pumped, right? I was extremely excited for this. This was a great opportunity. So we did some No Limit sessions. We talked about some No Limit strategy. We talked about it online. He would come down to my condo, came down a couple of times, and I would coach him in real life. He'd bring his notebook. He would always write everything on pencil, which I don't understand, but he would always do. And we started training. I taught him about pre-flop. I taught him about how you should be playing No Limit Hold'em. I taught him about a lot of his errors. I analyzed a bunch of his hands. And I really gave him a lot of in-depth personal coaching on how to become better at No Limit. And I don't know if you guys are aware of how coaching works, but the real issue with coaching, I think, is that the first few hours are just by far the most valuable because you're going to hit topics that are so important and so broad that it really teaches people the way that you should think, the way that you should approach poker. And we did those sessions, and I was like, oh, not sweating him at all. Not in any way did I think that Ben would not return the favor, right? And then after several of these sessions, at least 2 in person, and I want to say there was like maybe a couple calls on Skype, and then also some messages on Skype as far as coaching goes. After these sessions, week and a half later, he says to me, "Oh, it turns out I can't do it." And at the time, I didn't really make it a big deal, even though it was a big deal, because I didn't want to lose that potential friend, someone that I could hang out with or still maybe do some other deals with or whatever. I didn't want to lose that person as one of the very few people that's kind of at the same level as me in terms of where I am in my career. And so I just was like, you know what, it's fine. We'll move on, right? Even though this was totally unacceptable. After that point, we still had several deals kind of overhanging. We had a couple deals as far as, we gave Isildur a loan for 150K. He had a piece of that. In exchange, he would have a piece of my action. And this is actually where I made a fairly large mistake. For most of the year, I gave him a piece of the action for 3 or 4 months. I'm not sure how much he won. It was definitely a decent chunk. I won a lot in those games. And then in 2014, I had not played in a few months. And when I played a session against Isildur, I told Ben he didn't have any action. But of course, he had a right to that action because part of the loan with Isildur was that you had a right for the piece of the action. And so I made a mistake, and I wrote him out of a session. And this is one of the 2 mistakes that I made as far as our business deals are concerned. And Ben messaged me the next day, like, I'm supposed to have a piece of this. And I was like, oh, okay, yeah, you actually are correct. So he actually owed me some money because I lost money in the session. So that's one mistake that I made. And another mistake that I made was Isildur sat me in PLO, and we were not sure. I was at a time when Ben had action of me in PLO, and I wasn't sure if I was supposed to play him or not, but I wanted to play him on my action. So the question was, do I give Ben a piece or not? And I tried to get his attention on Skype, but he just wasn't there. Whatever, that's fine. And I made a game time decision to give him a piece that he ultimately regretted that I gave him. And I apologize for both of those events. I'm not perfect. I made a couple mistakes regarding, our deals here. But the bottom line still is that if you make a deal and you agree to exchange information, that's, in my book, that's a binding deal. Not, turns out I have an NDA because of this software that I have that makes it so I can't tell you anything. You can't bring that up later after you get the information from me. That's just bullshit. That's not acceptable. I don't care what your software does. That's not allowed, right? So I guess that, to me, was the biggest problem that I had. And then I think when you look moving forward a year or whatever, a year later, he then sat me at 501K cap no limit. And we had talked a good chunk about cap. He says in the thread that he'd not talked about cap with me at all. That is bullshit. That is complete bullshit. In fact, Jason Loves was there. We talked about it when we were hanging out one day. I talked a bunch about cap. He was playing someone in cap. I can't remember what his name is off the top of my head, but he was talking about all these mistakes he was making. We talked about what better strategies are. We talked about 30B1 cap stuff, and we talked a bunch about cap. And then to use that information and then sit me 6 months later after that combo or 9 months later after that combo, that is totally absurd. You do not make friends with people, screw them over in a deal, and then ask them questions about how they think about poker and a subject just to sit them 6 months later. Are you kidding me? That is an absurd way. This guy has no ethics. In fact, there's an understood thing, I think, in poker, where if you're going to talk strategy with players and you're going to coach players and you're going to go through an opponent analysis with somebody, there's an inherent I'm not going to play you later. I don't even think it needs to be said. Imagine if you coached people and then they're like, imagine if Dong shows up. He's like, too bad, Doug, spent a few too many years coaching me. That's not how the world of poker works. So when he says that we never talked cap and then he says that he just, he was a poker player, that's bullshit. He was targeting me because he knew my cap strategy. And I'm obviously a lot worse at cap. He didn't come to set me at no limit deep stack. No, he set me at cap where he knew what I would do. He knew I hadn't been studying it and he studied exactly what I did. That is complete bullshit. Okay? These business ethics are completely unacceptable. He is I'm trying to think what the word would be. He's a vulture in the high stakes poker community. And between sitting me later to target me, as well as breaking our deal after we'd already agreed upon it, I have no respect for Ben. And I would have to recommend anyone deciding to make a business deal with Ben to be very careful moving forward. So next I want to talk about my personal relationship with Ben, and I said this once before in the intro, but I want to say this again. I'm only bringing this to light because of what happened as far as our deal and him going south on it, and what happened really did hurt me a lot, and it's actually, when I look back at my life in the last few years, and I really mean this is probably the number one thing that upsets me, because I always looked up to Ben. I always looked up to him as one of like the great online players, Sauce, Ben86, Ike, a lot of those guys. I always looked up to them. And, I think a lot of people kind of forget that, maybe you think back to recent Heads Up No Limit where there hasn't been much battling. And really, I guess I've kind of been at the top for a while now. But I think people sort of forget that 4 or 5 years ago, I was playing small stakes. I did not have the recognition or the bankroll or the success, Maybe I've been around for a little while longer, but I really struggled for the first 3, 4, or 5 years out of the gate. And Ben was one of those people that I looked up to. So when I got an opportunity to meet him in Vancouver, I was extremely excited for that. I was excited to meet one of my idols, to meet someone that I very much respected, and then have an opportunity to build that relationship. And I think maybe that, to some extent, really is my fault that I wasn't expecting them to be a great person because I just assumed that they would be. When you see all these high stakes players from the outside view, you're like, oh man, these guys must have all their life together and they must be cool people and they must, all of this stuff. But that's just really not the case. They're just people, and a lot of them are assholes, or a lot of them have problems, or a lot of them, are deceitful people. They have issues. They're just people. They just happen to be very good at something that they do. So I met Ben in 2013, start of the year during this Malaysia game that's talked about earlier. And we met up once. Maybe we got coffee another time on that trip. And then we met up again when I moved to Shangri-La. Now, what was weird about that move was out of the gate the first few weeks, we hung out a few times, did a couple coaching sessions. And something that kind of just immediately jumped out at me about Ben that I thought just something was kind of off. He would just constantly throw all of his friends under the bus. And I remember the first time that I met him, one of his first conversational topics with me was like, you know what? Like, I always have Phil Galfond pieces online, and, I really don't want those pieces. He makes me take them. I don't want them. He should know that he's not good enough to beat those games. I don't want to just have your pieces. And I was like, okay, this is weird that he's telling me this, like, just out of the gate, right? And then he went on just talking about Galfond, being upset with Galfond. He's going to cut it off and all this stuff. And I think at that moment, when you see someone do that out of the gate, you should send a couple red flags that they might have like a few problems with maybe even where their life is at, or maybe the way they view people. I'm not totally sure. But I was like, whatever. Like, Galfond admittingly does seem like he'd be bad in a lot of the games that he was playing and probably losing. So from, a business perspective, that makes sense to me. And then he moved over talking about the one drop. He was about to play the big one he's about to play the 100K one drop. And he was talking about his friend Don Wynn. And he said, Don was trying to get me for free in the one drop, no markup. And I said, okay, well, if you're selling a markup, then don't sell to him. He's like, well, no, we were swapping. And I was like, I don't understand. If you're swapping, then you don't pay markup because you're getting his action. Do you think he's plus EV? And he said, well, but it's my action. And I was just like, I don't know. I legitimately don't know what to say here. Like, he was just brushing off the fact that his action even meant anything, like he's not plus EV, or it's like, I don't really know. I legitimately to this day just don't understand. But he did this about a bunch of people, and I don't want to go down this road, but he was just very negative overall. Over the course of that fall into winter, we only hung out a few times. It was mainly for coffee. We'd maybe talk about going to do something and then not do something if the schedule didn't work out or whatever. But we really rarely hung out. There's one day that comes to mind, and this will come up later in this story, but this one night, he invited me out to go to this bar. I said, sure, yeah, I'll go. It was me, my girlfriend, Jason Moe. I want to say maybe Dong was there. Maybe Jason Les was there. I'm not totally sure. But it was about 4 or 5 of us. So he invites us out to a bar, and we say, sure. We go get in line, so we leave the condo, we go get in line to get in the bar, and the line is massive, okay? The line's way out the door. And it's actually snowing, okay? It's freezing in Vancouver. It's snowing. We're all freezing. And we're waiting for about 20, 25, 30 minutes, and the line's just not moving. And I'm like, you know what? This is just ridiculous. To be honest with you, I would never wait in a line to get into a bar anyway, period, if there's an open bar. And by the way, the funny thing was there was an open bar in the line, so we left being in the line to go into a bar. But I said I would never wait in this line no matter what. So I text Ben, I say, look, it's freezing and snowing. This line is super long. We can't get in. If you want to meet up after this bar, we can go to the next bar together. And he says, "Oh, don't sweat it, man. No problem at all." And I remember this vividly because I ended up checking my texts about this night a year later. He texts me back, "Don't worry about it all. No sweat. We'll meet up some other time." And I was like, okay, cool, dude. Have a good night. So I want to flash forward now to 2014, in around, let's just say March-ish, okay? It was February, March, and April. I don't exactly remember what month it was. I was staying with Jason Les and Dong Kim at Shangri-La, and Ben was staying with Jakun, Shangri-La. And this one night, we agreed to all meet up for drinks and go out. So we got some drinks, talked a bunch of cap strategy, which is just too funny to me. But anyway, talked a bunch of cap strategy at a bar beneath Shangri-La. It's like the Asian sushi place or whatever. And then we went to the steakhouse across the street called Black and Blue. It's a nice steakhouse, whatever. So we were drinking, hanging out, whatever. So it was me, Ben, Jakun, Dong, and Cheat. We were all doing some drinking, obviously. You know, everyone was having some wine. Everyone was, you know, except for Dong, who doesn't drink. But we were all drinking, etc. And we agreed after that we would go back and hang out at my place. I had bought a few different kinds of nice scotch. I'm really into scotch. And I had a few that I really wanted to show Jakun and Ben. We could taste them, whatever. So we get back, and we're chatting for a little bit, and we pour out some scotch. We're drinking the different scotches, tasting them. I'm like talking about my thoughts on them, etc. And then we start talking about Heads Up No Limit. And I'd said that my win rate that year was either 10 or 15 BB per 100. I couldn't remember what it was. And Ben was like, "Yeah, but, you know, your sample means nothing, so it doesn't mean anything." And I was like, "Well, no, I've played a bunch of these guys. I've played Ben. I played some against Sauce. I played against Ike. I played against a bunch of these guys. My sample's almost only regs, and admittingly, it wasn't a big sample. It was maybe 50, 60, 70K hands, 80K hands. I'm not totally sure. But it was a truly crushing sample." And he said, "Oh, yeah? Well, then how about you give me 15 big blinds against Ike?" And it was at that moment that I realized that this person was not my friend. They weren't my friend. They'd always smiled at me. They'd always been nice to my face. But, you know, he looked absurdly angry. And he just starts yelling at us. And admittingly, when I look back at this, I was just so shocked about the way that this went down that I honestly kind of lost my ability to speak because of how upset I was that someone that I'd always respected and looked up to was treating me like this. But he just starts yelling at me. And I wish I could remember all of the quotes, but I was just in such a daze. But there's some specific ones that I can absolutely remember. And he looks at me and he says, "I hate people that look like you." And his eyes are just really intense and he's just staring me down. And Jakun says, "Hey, Ben, maybe we should head back, you know, WQ mains tomorrow, or whatever WQ's tomorrow. Like, it must have been in May then, I guess. But some term was tomorrow." And Ben just, like, wasn't having it. He just, like, went off on a rant. He hates people that look like me. I don't know exactly what that means. I guess, like, I don't know, faux hawk people or something, not totally sure. He then yelled at me that he has way more money than me. He yelled at me. It was a slew of things that were just all so mean and so hateful. At one point, he brought back up that story I told earlier about how we were at a bar, and it was actually raining, it wasn't snowing, I think, but it was near freezing. It was really cold out, and he brought that story back up, and he said, "People like you don't think you have to wait for people like me. You were never even gonna go to the bar that day, because you think that you don't have to wait for people like me." And I just, like, was standing there just shocked. You know, I didn't know what to say. I didn't realize that night, 5 months earlier, when I waited in line to get into a bar for 20 minutes and then texted him saying I was going to leave, I didn't realize that was so important to him, because maybe that there was some symbolism there that me leaving and not I don't know what to say, but, you know, how was I supposed to know that was such a terrible incident that had happened there? How was I supposed to know that he had bottled that up for so long and that he had that much hate about that event? And I remember looking up the text and just seeing just back and forth, like, "Oh yeah, have a good night, yeah, no problem, it's all good, we'll hang out later, we'll get a coffee or something." You know, it just seems absurd to me. I was choked up, you know? I was choked up. It's like one of those moments in your life when, you know, you really look up to someone and then you find out that they actually hate you. You know, they really hate you. And this pent up anger, he just went completely nuts. And this went on for, you know, a really long time. And Jakun kept saying, like, let's go, guys. Like, come on, there's no point to doing this. Like, this just doesn't make any sense. And he kept insisting, like, give me 15 big blinds per 100 against Ike. And I was like, look, I'll give you like, if you want to take Ike, we can just crossbook straight up. And he's like, you said you win 15, give me 15. And he's just going one thing after another, after another, after another. And meanwhile, it's like me, Jakun, him, Cheat, and then Dong's just like on his computer occasionally, like looking over, like, oh snap, like don't know what to say, you know. He's just like, and this goes on and on and on. And eventually, like, Jakun's like, I'm going to bed, like I have to play this tournament tomorrow. So now it's just Ben, and you know, I say, all right, let's talk this out. So we go into my bedroom, and you know, we try to have kind of more of a heart to heart, right? Like, he got picked on a lot as a kid, and apparently I reminded of those people. And, you know, we tried to like work it out. We did. But, man, and just like thinking back to it, it was like a really emotional moment for me. And like, when he left, I kind of sat there on my computer and I couldn't sleep. I was so distraught over what had just happened that I didn't really know what to do. And I thought about it. I'm like, you know what? This is not someone that I can have any kind of connection with. They've already proven to me that I can't trust them. They've already proven to me that, you know, they're willing to have moments like this. They're not someone that deserves my trust or my time. And so I sat there and I wrote and I edited down and I rewrote what I wanted, and I talked about our business relationships. And at the time it was much more in depth because, you know, it was more recent. I can't remember some of the stuff now. And obviously it's before the cap thing. And I wrote about, you know, the personal part. And I wrote a really long message to him because I wanted to make it clear that what happened on that night was unacceptable. You're not allowed to treat people like that. And this was going to be it for us. We were not going to be working together moving forward. And we needed to cut all our deals. So I sent him the message. And I just stayed up like all day, basically. I didn't go to bed. And the next day, he's playing PLO. But we have deals like hanging. Like we have action over here. We have action over there. You know, we have all this stuff. And I'm like, dude, I know you're on your computer. We have deals that I can't play until you figure this out. You need to respond to me so we can cut these deals or figure out what we're going to do with these business deals, these pieces. And then he says, and this is the last thing I ever heard from Ben. This is the last thing. He says, I can't even deal with this right now. That was the last thing I ever heard from him. So I was like, all right, everything's cut. We're done. We cut our deals. He was out in the Isildur alone, and he was out on my action. And that was it. And then the next thing I heard from Ben, he sat me a 501k cap, okay? So basically our last night that we spent hanging out discussing cap strategy, he then sits me at cap 6 months later, okay? So I guess as far as treating me, or sorry, as far as how I was treated, I just don't think that was fair. And I want people to know that even though Ben seems like he's a nice guy, he has some real problems deep down, and he has a lot of anger pent up. And I guess maybe I'm just the person that he had to take it out on for whatever reason. But I do feel like that helps highlight the story of what happened between me and Ben. Last, I want to address Ben's post he made here on 2+2, because there are some things in here that are lies, and so there are some things in here that are misdirection, and then he just leaves some things out. First, I want to talk about the 70K that he said that I made from his pieces. That's true, I made money. But I don't think how much I made from some of the pieces I had before you cut me off really account for the situation. In poker, oftentimes you'll make deals, and if you win or lose in the short term, you can't really say that means the deal was good or bad. It just means that event happened. So I think that using 70K as a way to be like, why aren't you happy? You made 70K. I don't think that's a good argument. You should look at what the deals were that were supposed to be in place and what the value of those deals are. I also find it extremely funny that he totally left out any of the flipping out on me in person at my place, yet somehow put in Doug like broke down and was really upset. Yeah, no kidding, because you flipped out on me for like a full hour. Also, this cap story doesn't make any sense at all, okay? Why on earth, after the event that happened, and then him sitting me at cap, when I come up to him in real life and say to him, I don't think that was cool you did with the cap thing. Do you really think he's like, hey, let's go talk about it after ignoring me on Skype and then also sitting me at 501k cap? Does that even really contextually make sense? He's like, oh yeah, let's go hang out. And then he says, it says, no, I'm good. Apparently he held a grudge. That is just a completely made up story and doesn't even make sense given the context of the story. Also, when he says that I unilaterally closed our deals with no right to do so, I really tried to work out some resolutions for those, but he wouldn't bother responding to me. You know, when we have all these deals hanging and I have to have them resolved in order to play, and someone isn't going to respond to me, and I say, let's end all our deals, and then they say, I can't even deal with this right now, and then never follow up with me at any point, I'm not sure what to say, especially when I respond to that with, okay, everything's off then, and then he doesn't bother responding. I don't really see how that's my fault here if you're just going to not even bother to respond. If he wanted to continue some of the deals that we had in place, he should have said something, and he had the opportunity to do so for days and then subsequent months, and then didn't decide to do that. So I don't feel like that's a fair attack here on me. Also, as far as the other people that are concerned here, again, I don't really want to throw them under the bus with what people have said to me. As far as their relationship with Ben, that's between them and Ben. I'm okay saying what's happened between me and Ben, but I'm not going to say that someone said something about Ben and then turn this into a big thing as far as other people are concerned. This is between me and Ben and what happened and really just what happened between us. So I'm not going to be outing other people here in terms of what they said. I want to thank everyone for hearing me out today. I know that we do a lot of fun stuff here. I love doing the news. I love doing the poker hands. And of course, Twitch highlights are always great. And I want to try and stick to more of that kind of stuff, but I needed somewhere to put a video to address the situation on 2+2. This made the most sense. And I want to thank, once again, everyone for hearing me out. And I hope you can understand why I have decided to make this video.